Have you ever wondered if there's something more to life than just what you see? The Detective Diaries starts in 4 minutes. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain? You're not alone. The Detective Diary starts in 3 minutes. If you believe in endless possibilities, the Detective Diary starts in 2 minutes. Get comfortable, because in 1 minute we'll be sitting down to discuss the strange and interesting. And we are live. You're watching another episode of the Detective Diaries. I'm your host, Greg Lawson. This is where we interview strange and interesting people I find along my paranormal journey. Next week, we're going to be talking to Aaron Sager. Aaron is basically a paranormal pop culturalist. He knows everything about pop culture as far as zombies and comics, and he's been on a ton of different TV shows. And I really can't wait to get him on here. I've been trying for a while, and I feel very blessed that he's willing to find some time and come on Detective Diaries with us. I am very excited today to have a friend of mine on, Brooks Barley. I've known Brooks for, I don't know, a couple of years, I guess. We really haven't got to do anything together. We've talked a little bit about on Facebook and stuff. And so he's come on Detective Diaries just watching a couple of times, and he had such good input. I really wanted him to come on here. So without further ado, let's get him in here and get me to shut the heck up, and let's find out what Brooks is all about. Brooks, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh man, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And
Yeah, well, it's really cool that that we live so close to each other, and also it's really cool to be able to bring you on here and share with everybody a different perspective on ghost hunting and
sure.
just paranormal research.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You were talking about. I think we've known each other. I was working on the show. That was 2015.
Oh wow!
So
So
it's
it's
been a
been
few. Yeah, yeah,
so you've been avoiding me for 5 years. Then that's
a
impressive.
mutual friend of ours uh, actually told me about you, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's a cop, but he's also like a paranormal investigator, and you work on a ghost show, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, you guys should meet." And so the first time we ever had a discussion, you walked onto the beach in full uniform, and I'm like, sitting on the beach drinking a beer in Point Venture, and we had a discussion. That was the first time we actually got to talk. So
Yeah.
yeah, man, it's cool to actually start to get to know you more and be able to share some stories with you.
That's cool. For those of you that are watching, if you can go down and comment where you're watching from, that's always really cool. I bet no one can beat Kat Ward watching from Australia. I'm just guessing. Maybe I don't know. Got some people somewhere further than that. I don't know. But if you could like and share this broadcast, you would not believe how much that helps this out and gets the word out. And I get a ton of views when you guys share the broadcast. So if you have any questions, also, if you can keep them as short as you can, throw them up there. And Brooks and I, during the broadcast, we will address your questions. And let's see what we have right now. If we have anybody up here yet with any questions, we got people from St. Charles, Missouri, Kyle, Texas. We got, let's see anybody else. Somebody said you got a nice shirt. Whose shirt? My shirt or Brooks's shirt?
Pretty sure
Andrew?
they're talking about yours.
The Overlook? I don't know. You got a pretty cool shirt. I don't know what's on there. What is that?
I think they're little flows. It's a little floral design. I wanted to make sure you had the best stuff for your show.
Nice. Appreciate that.
Nice.
Greta is on. Greta is a entertainment manager and all around cool person. She works with Chip Coffee on a regular basis. So those of you who know Chip, that's Greta. And let's see, MJ from the UK is on. Just popping by to say hello. Cool. I'm willing to bet she's probably going to be going to bed pretty soon. It's I think it's close to midnight over there. Well, and my old boss, Joe Rodriguez, says hi. So caught up on that, and we'll try to keep I'll try to keep going to them and finding out what's going on if they have any questions. But
cool.
A lot of people probably don't realize why I've asked you to come on here. And the main thing is you're a videographer, and you were a videographer for one of the biggest paranormal ghost hunting TV shows ever, right?
That's right. Called Ghost Hunters, the original OG Ghost Hunters. Man, awesome people, awesome guys. Can't say enough amazing things about the entire crew and talent on that show, and just the compassion and empathy that they shared during their investigations. It's just amazing. And
what season was that you were filming?
That was season 11.
11. Okay.
Yep.
Incredible how long they ran.
You can go check them out. That entire season's really good. As far as excitement goes, there was some really exciting moments during that season. And of course, there's always the handful of episodes where nothing really happens, and they go upstairs and they're like, "Oh, well, your toilet's broken," and that's the sound you've been hearing for the last 2 years. And I went ahead and fixed your toilet, by the way. They were those kind of guys. They actually used to be plumbers, so they
that helps.
That's how they got started in it.
Yeah.
But basically, the way I was introduced to the show. I was in the drone business for many years. Before drones were like a thing, I built custom drones for police officers and various law enforcement for fire and rescue, and I ended up building a custom drone for the DP of Ghost Hunters. And so we were introduced and we hit it off, and I guess about a year went by after I had built this drone for him, and he came back and he said, I don't know if you're interested in doing this, but if you want to operate camera, or be a camera assistant or anything like that, just let me know. And I said, so you're going to give me a camera and pay me to go into notably historical places with a camera, and you're going to pay me to do that? Then yes. Okay.
That's a good deal.
I'm in. So I didn't exactly know what I was in for, but I can tell you I went in as a huge skeptic. I'm very mechanically minded, and I'm an artist as well. But the mechanical side of me is just very logical. So going into it, I wanted to go in with a super open frame of mind, and try to understand really what was happening, and if there was any legitimacy to what was happening.
Right.
And so
and that's actually a really good frame of mind to go into something like this with.
Yeah. And the thing is when you're put into a dark room, and they send you in with the camera that has an IR emitter on it, and you're basically seeing in the dark, and you're in the dark by yourself for however many hours.
Right.
It's very easy to become vulnerable and let your mind start kind of playing tricks on you, and there's a part of you, I think, that breaks down psychologically when you're in those spaces for a long time. And that's the part that I didn't know about until being in those spaces for extended periods of time. Strange things happened, and they stuck with me, and it was really hard to figure out where to compartmentalize those things and how to deal with those things. And I think that's a really...
I know you chimed in last show when we had Francois LaRosa, director or producer, on here.
Yeah.
And you were really kind of identifying with him as far as the things that he had to deal with, as far as, opening yourself up to this energy, I guess would say.
It's something I think that people discount far too much. And it's not always what you see that haunts you. It's the things that sometimes you don't see. It's the things you can't catch on camera. It's the things you can't pick up on a microphone. It's the things that your eyes and your ears and your emotional, state will be affected by in being in these places. So it's the invisible things that are the scariest, I would say. And I'm sure you can contest to that.
Yeah.
You've been in so many places, probably more than I have, honestly.
The people that rely on technology to collect evidence for the paranormal, I don't know much about that, but I do know this: stories of the paranormal have been going on as long as human beings have been able to relay stories. So it's my belief we already are equipped with what we need to experience this stuff. And I think we need to be really aware of that, and not completely get off that and rely on our technology.
You're 100% right. The thing is that what we want to do as humans in trying to collect evidence is we want to have some solid thing, some tangible thing that we can archive and say, this happened. And that's what I like to call, I kind of came up with this phrase, it's like the collective group experience. When that happens and you catch something and then everybody sees it, which happened several times during my time on Ghost Hunters, it's crazy. I mean, the energy is just alive, and everybody's feels a validation after, many times just sitting in the dark and not really getting anything.
Right.
So when that happens, it really is amazing. But it is the other portion of it, I think, that is very hard to convey. And I think it's hugely important to pay attention and be mindful of your emotional states going into these spaces.
Right.
If you're going to go into some place you're scared of, there's a reason you're afraid of it. There's probably a reason, and you need to always listen to your heart and your mind, and kind of have those things in alignment before you go into those spaces.
Yeah, your gut instinct, your all that. Greta has swung at the fences on a question here. So let's throw it up here. So Greta wants to know, what would be one of your most interesting things you've caught on video? Thanks, Greta.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. I will hop forward a little bit, but the most interesting thing that I caught on camera, it was my third investigation, and it was at the almshouse in Philadelphia, which, if you know anything about almshouses, they were created for the poor back in the 1700s, and they basically would feed and house the poor, the mentally ill, the criminally insane. And so this almshouse in Philadelphia had seen all those things and then been repurposed over the years. It was orphanage at one point, and then it became body storage in the winter because it would get so cold in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
they couldn't dig a grave, so they'd store bodies there. So
did you happen to send me a photo of this?
The almshouse, there is a picture of one of the hosts in front of the almshouse there. It's not like a awesome photo of it, but you can look it up. It's yeah, there you go. That's the front of the house there, and the DP is doing an interview there with one of the hosts. And so this place had seen a lot of sadness, a lot of death, and it was a heavy energy just going in to begin with. And the way it worked with ghost hunters was, the investigation team would go in first with their camera guys. My job was to get all the B-roll. So what I did was they would hand me a sheet that would have all these claims on it of various, paranormal claims. And they go like, this area, this happened, in this area, this happened. We need you to capture these areas. So basically they'd go in first and do their investigation. And when they were done, they'd usually go back to the hotel or be done for the day. And so I'd be in these spaces alone with the camera. And this particular house, the almshouse, they had repurposed it into and kind of turned it into an apartments, a salon, and a gym. So the gym was literally where this big stone room where they would chain up the criminally insane and the mentally ill and things. Terrible stuff happened there. But they turned it into a gym. And one of the claims was exercise equipment moving on its own. So I went in with my camera to capture this after they had already done their initial investigation, and started trying to find some interesting angles. And I was using a camera with just an IR emitter, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with that look, where it's just kind of a see in the dark, night vision kind of look. So I started to frame this big heavy punching bag that they had, one of the big heavy bags, and started to set my camera up and get some interesting angles on this big heavy punching bag. And I looked down at my camera. From the time I went from looking at the punching bag to looking at my monitor on the camera, the punching bag started to just swing violently on its own. That was the first time I'd been legitimately scared in that fashion. And the fight or flight thing was just, I mean, well, and the thing was, I didn't have an option to do either because I was new at the job. I didn't want to call on a radio and be like, I think I've seen a ghost. I didn't know what to do.
I think
So
it's great that they stuck the rookie by himself in the dark holes and stuff like that, because that's beautiful.
oh
I love
yes,
it.
it really really is. And so, you know, I just used the fear and I got closer to the bag and set the camera up closer, but I was terrified. I mean,
Uh,
it was everything in me not to run out of that building. And when it was over, when after I got the shot, the bag had kind of stopped swinging. I was like, all right, I think that's good for this room. And I
yeah.
moved on to the next room.
And
But
Francois says very true about what we were talking about earlier, as far as opening yourself up to this stuff and not paying attention. But
yeah, and that's the kind of the unseen, um, you know, price you pay to be in those spaces. I would say it's what I call spiritual residue, and that's the only way I can describe it. And it things stay with you. And this particular instance, I don't think it was that, something necessarily staying with me in that, besides just a really scary moment. But there were other experiences I had where I did have there was more of a malevolent feeling. For the most part, the experiences I would have, it was like the ghost just wanted attention. That's what it was from my experiences. And little things from like little pebbles being thrown at you and noises and things. Um, and it was really interesting because at a point I wasn't necessarily afraid anymore, but I knew when to be afraid, if that makes sense, because I'd spent so much time in the spaces. It'd be like, okay, here we are in a dark environment again, and have a camera and I'm shooting the stuff, and it's just kind of you're doing your job, and you get kind of start to acclimate to being in these dark spaces. But sometimes, those energies were overwhelming, and one that I still haunts me and in my emotional in my mind, still to this day, is happened at an old fort in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And it was called Fort Rodman. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Fort Rodman, but
yeah.
it was a U.S. fortification that was built in 1857, and it was built by Robert E. Lee. And they stopped construction on it about 20 years later for whatever reason. But they had basically built this to be on the front lines for various reasons to protect New Bedford from attacks and things. And it was a beautiful place. Actually, I think you might have some pictures in there. But they called it the Old Stone Fort, is what it's kind of lovingly referred to as.
Is it the
And
long barracks there that you sent me?
yep, yep. So that's the front of it there. And we lit the front of it there for the show. And so before the show would begin, I'm sure you guys have seen the episodes, but they turn the lights off. They go, okay, lights out. We're going to start the investigation. So this was part of that sequence. And the inside of it was just breathtaking and weird and just a bizarre place. And connected to this fort was a battery where they would keep munitions. And they had multiple batteries, but one of the most notable batteries was the Alfred Milliken battery, which was connected to it. And there was about, I would say, an eighth of a mile between the fort and the battery. And underground, there was these just long, dark corridors. And going into this corridor was one of those moments where I went, there's something really not right here. And, as usual, they sent me in with a camera and said, you know, do your worst kind of situation. And when I walked in, it was overwhelming. And it was like everything in me to get down and walk through these corridors. And, you know, I highly recommend you look up the Milliken and Fort Rodman. It has a really interesting history, but very dark history too. Also saw a lot of death. But the other thing that it saw was, and probably still does, was a lot of homeless and you know, drug addicted individuals would stay there. And so when we were scouting the location for the show, we found a guy laying in a hole in the middle of the pitch black, and just laying there. And he had syringes all around him, but literally just laying in a hole in the pitch black. And when the police showed up, they were like, "This guy's probably been here for a week." And he just had a bottle of water and was surrounded by, you know, paraphernalia. It was a terrible and terrifying thing to see. Before we even started the show. So then I had to go back.
Well, I can sympathize with you because I've seen many of that situation. Just
I'm sure, and
yeah,
and
it's
matter
very
what state
scary.
you're in, it's terrible. So
Yeah.
that was the first time I had to spend a lot of time down there and kind of try to make it look interesting. It wasn't the most interesting place, to be honest. It was just this long corridor, and that was full of graffiti and had been there for, you know, a very long time, and had seen a lot more than just military action. You know, it was just a magnet for all sorts of bad things. So, and there was a bunch of satanic things on the walls, and there's just a lot going on there. That was the place that changed my mind about the paranormal, from just being scared of things or having these little experiences to going like, there is good and bad energy. And, you know, and the simplest way to kind of have equate those things is like good and bad. And there's those two things exist. They do.
So Amanda wants to know, how do you overcome that kind of fear, that experience? You're down there, you have to do a job. What do you do to kind of mitigate that?
Well, firstly, it's an insane amount of mind over matter. But, you know, I would say my alcohol intake definitely went up significantly, not during the shoot, but to deal with the post portion of it, was generally kind of how I'd like, basically when we get off at 5 o'clock in the morning, because we work all night from 5 to 5, sun up to sundown, or excuse me, sundown to sun up. You know, your schedule's screwed up. You're going through these experiences. You don't really know what to do. And, you know, it's kind of a easiest way to deal with it kind of thing before you know how to deal with it. But for all intents and purposes, going into those places there's nothing easy about it. It's like that job was probably one of the hardest jobs I had, not only physically, but mentally, and trying to get into a headspace where you could be creative or capture anything it's an undertaking, and it takes a certain kind of person. I hate to say it, like I don't think I could do it anymore like that. I feel like I satiated a lot of that you know, thing that was interested. Not that I wouldn't go into a haunted place again, because I absolutely would, but I just don't seek it out like I feel like I needed to at earlier time in my life. So
right. Where is this?
That is the old Aspenook Mill, and that's the graveyard across from the old Aspenook Mill, which is located. Oh man, where was it located? It was a little town, of course, in Connecticut, because all the scary stuff happens in Connecticut.
That's okay. Somebody watching's Googling it right now. And they're going to tell us.
Griswold, Connecticut is where it's. Yeah. And so that is all these terrible things happened at this mill, and it, you know, seen a fire and a bunch of death from a huge fire that happened. A ceiling collapsed and killed a bunch of workers there, and it was an old textile mill, and it was like it was basically employment for much of the town there. And so this graveyard that I'm shooting here, which is literally right across the street from the mill, is where they buried a lot of people that died in these terrible accidents. And so that's actually the DP. He was training me on how to stylistically shoot a graveyard like this. Every show has a look to it. And so what he was doing was basically coaching me through how to do, that's a slider there. I'm doing these really slow kind of slider dolly moves on that brick wall to get some eerie shots of the graveyard. The point that I wanted to get to with my earlier from my earlier story was that when you walk away from those situations, you don't realize that it's going to stay with you like that. And it was affecting me. I was gone for 4 to 5 weeks at a time, and I'm married and have been for 17 years and have a daughter, and was away from them for 4 or 5 weeks at a time. So that was taxing already. And
Right.
I'd come home for 2 or 3 days and then be back at it for another 4 or 5 weeks. That's just the way it was. But when I'd go home, my wife started to notice that I wasn't myself. And that was when she started to intervene and, hey, is everything okay? I'm sure everything's okay. And, things weren't okay, and things were following me. And she still believes, and I do too, that something followed me home because we were having experiences in our house that we had never had before. Heavy footsteps. We had a 2-story place, and heavy footsteps above us all the time. And it was happening while I wasn't there. And I was working on Ghost Hunters. So she'd be calling me freaking out, like there's something in the house. She literally thought we had an intruder. And it continued. And sadly, I didn't believe her until I went home one weekend and was trying to sleep. And it happened to me, and I heard it. And it was like a 200-pound man walking above my head, and my wife and daughter were gone. And I just laid awake. Then I was like, oh my God, I'm having an experience at my house. And I didn't believe my wife. I feel really bad. So there's my wife chiming in there. Things were not okay. And actually, it was the first time that I was like, I need a Bible. And I actually Googled what I should say to the spirit, what scripture I should read to the spirit or whatever it was. And I was terrified. I mean, I went upstairs and I was like, I could hear this thing pacing as I was going up the stairs. And whatever it was not kind. And so I just started reading these various scriptures and actually, I was at the same time was saying some choice words because I was upset that I had let it go for this long and not believe my wife, which was even worse. I think was insult to injury there. But it finally left, actually, after probably, I think it was about a month we had that going on. It finally left. And it left shortly after a friend visited who is kind of, I've been friends with him for many years, and he's a sensitive, but he came to visit, and my wife and daughter were gone, and I hadn't seen him in probably a year. And he kind of just made a surprise visit, and he showed up. I hadn't talked to him except for just hey, come on over and hang out. And so he drove from Houston, came down, and he walked through the front door, and I was, hey, nice to see you. It's been so long. And his eyes just go up, kind of glance upstairs, and he goes, do you have company? I'm like, no, there's nobody here. And he said, do you have a ghost? And my face must have just melted at that point, because I mean, he just was spot on. And I was at a loss at that point. And that really kind of solidified that there was something, thank you, that there was something, something going on. So, you know, those are the things that Francois was talking about last week, where things stay with you, and it's that spiritual cleansing process that's super important. And, you know, that's what really wanted me, or the things that really touched me were these weren't the things that I saw, you know, punching bags swinging or rocks being thrown or things getting knocked over. It was the things that I couldn't see that were happening that were the most haunting and frightening. And you know, the process of getting rid of those things was a task, and it was at a great cost. So.
Well, this is something that a lot of people don't consider, you know, and you and Francois have this different perspective of not only doing research, but actually being there and trying to capture this stuff the same way that the regular guys that are ghost hunters that have always done this and are used to that. I mean, it's a weird environment to be put in, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I'd watch these seasoned camera guys that had been operators for, you know, a decade on the show, and they just didn't flinch. I mean, literally the first time when I saw that punching bag and I had to go out, and I was like, I have to tell somebody. And I told somebody and they were like, oh yeah, you probably just saw a ghost. Like, what? Like, this is
get back down there.
Yeah, like I thought this was like dinosaur hunters. I didn't know I was actually going to see a dinosaur. Like,
right.
But yeah, they were just very matter of fact about it. And you know, the guys that I think you know, most of that crew are still on the show, and the same crew, and they're a tight knit family. And you know, the process that they used in ghost hunting was really interesting, because their investigation techniques were not, I mean, they were fairly primitive but effective. And they were very strict on, you know, nobody plays jokes on each other. None of that stuff is acceptable during investigations. You know, we had the most sterile environment we could possibly have. And, you know, the things that I really stood out to me, and that added a gravity to my own experiences, were that these guys had such a big heart for and compassion for the dead. And they wanted to get the truth. And if they didn't get the truth, they didn't get it. Or what somebody thought was the truth, they didn't capture, you know, something spectacular on film, then it was just another day. You know, maybe it was just like I said, a toilet running or a air vent that had something. But they would debunk it. And so when things did happen, it was that much more, you know, powerful.
Right.
So yeah, if you have a chance, Greg, I highly recommend you go watch like just kind of thumb through those episodes, if you will, and I think you'll find them pretty interesting. And I was gonna say, I was kind of primed when I got there. My first day that I started, I got picked up from the airport by the DP, and he had just worked at. They'd been shooting the Physic House, which the Physic House, Dr. Philip Physic, who is known as the father of American surgery, he created all these surgical tools that we now use today. And he was doing that back in 1786. And that's how old the house was. And so what he was doing to create his tools, which people didn't know was kind of the deep, dark secret, was he was hiring people to rob graves, and then they bring the corpses to his basement, and he would experiment with his newly created tools in the basement.
Wow.
And there's still tools we use today, which is crazy because they look very primitive. But so I wasn't there for this particular experience, but it was one of those collective group experiences that I was talking about earlier. And the DP picked me up and I said, so how are things going? He's like, well, something happened last night. I'm like, oh, here we go. He's just going to start screwing with me right from the get go, you know?
Right.
So, so they were basically down in the basement. It was both of the host and the DP, and he's walking and filming them as they go down this hallway, and this big heavy medical cart just comes slamming into the cameraman, the DP, from behind. And it was just them. And I mean, he says all sorts of explicit things, obviously, and it was just the most insane thing. And if you watch that episode, it is scary.
Do you remember which episode that is?
It's either episode, I think it's episode 7, but it's called The Physical. You'll see it in the title. But it's truly terrifying. And so he had just gone through this experience, and it was one of the first times he had gone through something that physical, where something had been, thrown or pushed at him.
Right.
And so everybody's energy was just, up here when I started. Everybody was just pumped, and the energy was pretty palpable.
Right.
So when he showed me the footage that day that we got there, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, man, I'm walking into something that might be real here. And that's when I started kind of having a, what did I get myself into moment.
Right.
But yeah.
No, see, that's so great that that they would bring in somebody that is a skeptic and that it hasn't been out ghost hunting their whole life, and you bring them in and watch the change, watch the evolution of that person. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that I would say was one of the hardest things was I would have have these experiences or whatever, and the crew didn't really want to talk shop. Everybody just kind of wants to go on about their life. When they're off work, they're off work, and people aren't really interested in exchanging ghost stories that worked on the show, which I found very interesting. So for the most part, I kept to myself, and I'd only tell my stories to, that if I had something happen, I'd call my wife or a friend and be like, man, you'll never believe what happened. But I really didn't talk to the crew much about those kind of things, because it was like they were just doing their job.
Right.
And
work is work.
That's right. And it was just like, it wasn't anything new to them.
Sarah from Wales says, hi, we've been
telling stories. From Wales.
What's that?
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I cut you off. What'd you say?
Oh no, I was just saying going into those guys that did all that hard work for however many years, and see all these assistants and crew come and go, they weren't really interested in hearing anything from a greenhorn guy. They were just like, oh, okay, yeah, it's happened to all of us, kind of thing. But everybody else thought it was amazing. The other thing is they gave me one tip when I started on the show, and they said, unless you're ready for it, don't tell anybody that you work on ghost hunters, because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start telling you ghost stories.
That's right.
You don't want to hear. You don't want to sit through. And I made
so
that
funny.
mistake at a bar one night, and holy cow, it was like a line of people asking me, generally the same question is like, is it real? How do you respond to that? I think so. I'm pretty sure it is.
And I we'll be at a party or at some sort of gathering or something like that doesn't have anything to do with ghosts.
Yeah.
And somebody will bring up, some sort of paranormal thing, and somebody in the group will go, what? You're a ghost hunter? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a paranormal researcher, explorer kind of thing. And they'll go, oh, and then kind of wander off.
Yeah.
And 15 minutes later, when I'm over, getting some shrimp dip or something, they'll meander on up when nobody else is listening.
Yeah.
Goes, hey, I had this thing happen to me this time. So it seems like everybody has some sort of
it's
weird.
Crazy the amount of people that do, and I have a heart for those people a lot more than I used to. But unless you want to get into some really long conversations, it's not something you bring up. And actually, it was kind of a running joke on the show. Is like, hey, just say you work on Cheaters or some other show. So like we would just make up things. Like we'd have a camera be like, hey, what show are you working on? Oh, we're working on Cheaters. Like, really? Oh my God. What did he do? Who is he cheating with? You know, kind of.
Right.
So we did have some fun with it sometimes, but yeah, you know, overall amazing experience. I'm still in the industry, and I work for a broadcast studio now, and it's definitely far more tame. Um, but yeah, you know, I think that it's important for people to seek their truth, or to explore things that they're interested in, even if it's the darker things, even if it's ghost hunting, the supernatural. I think it's important for people to do it, but I also think it's very important that you understand going in that there are consequences for doing it, and it's how you deal with those consequences, and having enough of presence of mind to understand that when you're going into those spaces that you may come out a different person.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing to say, but it's true. I mean, your life experiences mold you, and whether they're in the living world or the supernatural world or whatever, all of your experiences shape you, and it's a real thing. It definitely changed me as a person, and
And you
for the
know, we
better in many ways. And but you know, it took a good while, many months for me to get over what I'd been through.
and we talked about that, and you know, I'm like I said, I'm a firm believer that we have the equipment we need to know, or we need in order to communicate and pay attention to what's going on around us.
Right.
And you know, there's these other experimental type things that people use,
Sure.
but I kind of always stick with the basics. I stick with digital and analog video
Mm-hmm.
and audio. And I noticed, I know you sent me a picture here. That's a ton of equipment. Where was
Yeah.
that? What's going on there?
So that was actually at the Alms house. That was a little shed that was kind of an afterthought. Um, but that's where we staged all of our equipment for that particular shoot. And you can see on the left there, those are pretty old school Sony cameras that shot on mini DV. So my job, and that fellow that's sitting there, our job was to wrangle the media on top of everything else we were doing, and keep all the media in order for post production, so they could basically keep everything organized. The cameras on the right are the little cameras, and you can see the IR emitters on top. They kind of look like a red light.
Yeah.
Those are the cameras that I generally would be using in those various spaces. But yeah, that's just a maybe you know a quarter of the equipment. There is a lot of equipment. I mean, I think you can. There's a picture of the investigation van there somewhere, but that van and one more that we had in the caravan, full of equipment, lights, dollies, everything you can imagine. So and generally, you know, one investigation would take about a week. Sometimes it'd be like 4 or 5 days, but you know, in that time, in that spans, we'd shoot one episode. So what looks like one night at a location was actually a week, or you know, several days to a week for each location. So and we'd set up and break down, you know, every morning, every night, and so very taxing, very physical work on top of very mentally challenging work, and going into these places. There was a
Yeah.
lot of factors that played in there.
You
But
hear a lot of critique. It's like, well, what do they expect? They go in there for one night, they hang out for an hour or two, and then they pack up. You know what? It's like, man, you don't know how this works.
yeah, no, you have no idea. And I think it's funny when I tell people that, because they're like, no way, they were just there for a night. I'm like, no. There for many nights. And you know, they'd have the two primary hosts of the show, two primary investigators, and then they had, you know, over the years would add other investigators. So each night they'd let a new, you know, couple of investigators go through, and we'd set up for those investigators each time. So just an insane amount of work, but very cool. And for me, one of the coolest things about it was being given access to these, historical buildings that are notably haunted, have had these things for, entities for many years. And they're like, the doors were just wide open to us. We could go anywhere we wanted to in the building. So, I mean, there's places that, the general public didn't get to see. And so having that experience and that privilege was probably the coolest thing about it.
Yeah.
I remember,
some of the times that we're overseas and the places that we get to go into that other people don't, is pretty fantastic. Places that are, 400, 500, 600 years old and get to climb around in them. I'm going to throw up a couple of pictures here and just interested here.
Oh.
Are y'all grave robbing there? What are you doing?
That was part of the story, actually. This is a recreation, and we do those on occasion, or actually pretty frequently, to kind of paint a better image for people watching the show. We do these recreations, and funny enough, the picture that you used on your banner was a picture of me dressed up doing for a recreation.
This one?
A dark entity. Oh, wrong one. Whoops.
Oh, okay. I just don't put stuff on Facebook, man.
See, that's the spiritual cleansing I'm talking about.
Okay, let's get into that a little bit. All right, so spiritual cleansing. Those of you who are asking,
that's
quite a few people are asking.
You don't know. So, cucumbers will suck the demons right out of you. That's my daughter having some fun with me. I let her do a facial, and yes, I put it on Facebook. It's there forever now.
It's awesome.
But
so
man,
no,
I have to ask you.
Yeah.
Your newest book is about your own personal experiences,
right?
So very similar to what we're talking about. And we had a little pregame last night. We talked a little bit, and you told me about a bird, and I wanted to hear that story again because it's such a cool story.
So, Rosemary Ellen Guiley contacted me at one of the events, and she asked me if I had ever written a book about my own experiences. And I said, well, nobody wants to hear about that. And she goes, no, I think they do. And so she had brought my other book in with her publishing company. So we went ahead and I wrote that book with her, and it ended up about half as long as we intended it to be, because she passed away halfway through writing the book, and I didn't want to continue with it. Yeah.
Wow.
But the story that you're talking about is when I was in the military, I used to try to get away from all the other soldiers and sailors and kind of get off into the weeds. Mm-hmm. And I was in Hong Kong, and I went over to a Lantu Island. It's an island off of mainland China near Macau. And it has the last Shaolin temple is there. And I wanted to go see that because I'm kind of interested in military and martial arts stuff. So I went over there, and I went to a particular fort that I thought would have been I thought it was going to be like someplace you pay admission to go in and look at the fort. It wasn't. Uh-huh. I paid a taxi cab driver to take me there, and he basically just took me down this dirt road, dumped me off, and I walked through the woods, and there's this fort, right? It's all, I mean, there's no roofs. It's just walls and foundations and stuff. But they had put that fort there for pirates. Well, as soon as I got there, this bird came out and was jumping around right in front of me and squawking at me and jumping around. And I was like, I need to get this bird out of here. I thought it was like a kildee in Texas, that when you walk across the field, the mom and dad will come over and act like their wings broken and try to get you away from their baby. So I thought that's what this bird was doing. Well, I spent a couple of hours there, and this bird's jacking with me the whole time. And I get done, and I took some pictures. And I got back in the taxi cab and I left. And years later, I realized what bird it was. And it's a bird that the Earth Mother sends to people when she has a message for you. And I thought that was freaking awesome. It was awesome in the fact that I had a preconceived notion I was there for a paranormal event, like a ghost or I was looking for, old grave, some bones or something like that. I had this preconceived notion in my head of what I was looking for, and I couldn't at all see what was right in front of me the whole time. So,
and it's unbelievable when you have hindsight like that too, and you realize that something very positive came out of that experience,
right?
But you're looking for other things, and that's to your point. Firstly, love that story. It's an amazing story. I'm sure there's a lot.
If you're looking for something as opposed to observing your environment,
probably not going to see what you want to see.
No.
Yeah. Or have any kind of experience at all. I think that's a big part of the demeanor of many ghost hunters is going in and just having kind of a stillness and awareness, but not necessarily looking, just asking questions, walking around, and that's exactly the kind of demeanor that all the investigators that I worked with had. And it was really inspiring because, the questions they'd ask were just super thoughtful, and they didn't go in and agitate. They just went in and very, kindly asked, basic questions. That there's other ways and shows that I don't agree with where they go in and, scream and say terrible things to try to agitate the dead. And I absolutely, it just makes me retch inside. So that's, in my opinion, the very wrong way of going about things. So
this photo you sent, I didn't recognize that. What am I looking at?
That is Fort Rodman. That's inside of it. So each one of those had early on had a cannon. So they have their cannonballs and their cannons, and each one of those little kind of spaces there. So interestingly, like most other historical things, it got repurposed in the Second World War as a regiment, and they would use it as an infirmary. So that place saw an insane amount of injured soldiers and dying soldiers, and God knows what. But it was a creepy place. And funny story about it though, my wife, I'd tell her all these amazing stories, and she'd be like, "Oh, whatever. I wish I could go." And so I FaceTimed her, and had my camera with me, and I was doing my, B-roll. And so I walked her through the entire place with the, night vision view, and that she thought that was like maybe the coolest thing she'd ever seen. So I finally got to share it with her, and that was one of my last investigations before I left the show. I am so excited to be talking to you, and you have some other projects that we've been talking about that I'm super stoked about that I'm not going to mention, but a lot of good things to come. And it's been just a huge pleasure to talk to you and be able to share this stuff, because I never really thought I would. I share it with family and friends or whatever, but to be able to do it this way is really very healing, and it's awesome and cathartic to be able to do it. So thank you so much for having me.
Man, I appreciate it. Let's throw up a couple of things here from the folks that are there. Let's see. She says, Sky says, thank you for all your hard work. These shows would not be great. You did a great job. So that's really cool. Is there any website or anything that people can find you at?
So I don't really promote a lot of my things. I just started promoting some of my artwork. And you can find me. It's Body 13 Production on Facebook. On Instagram. You can find some of my artwork there. And also I have another Instagram page that's Brooks of Consciousness. So you can find some of my photography and work there. I don't really promote a lot of it. I just, like I said, kind of started to do that. I have, you know, a pretty basic IMDb if you kind of want to see where I started to cut my teeth at a young age with film and production. But, you know, I really don't promote a lot of my work or anything like that. So, you know, I wish I had something to sell, but I don't.
No, but I mean, people can find you on Facebook and friends you on Facebook. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us, because there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable with saying, wow, you know, I saw something I can't explain. They're concerned about that. And I really appreciate it. And I love having, like I said, your perspective of a skeptic coming in behind the camera and, you know, a season later, having a different idea of what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, and I kind of just want to echo these things to people because I think it's important. But, you know, I encourage people to go find their own truths, and by whatever means they need to do that, just always remember to be mindful of what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's real easy to get into something you don't want to. And I've known people that have done ghost hunting that have, you know, had those kind of experiences and went about things the wrong way, and they paid pretty heavily for it. So,
well, cool, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up because, believe it or not, we've been talking.
We're 2 minutes in.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Time flies.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks a lot, man.
Cheers. Thank you so much for having me. I know you probably can't drink at the moment, but at some point we'll have a beer together.
Okay. And we'll do this again.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Thanks, bro. All right. So that was Brooks Barley. He is a videographer, worked on a season of Ghost Hunters, and had a really cool perspective coming in and sharing it with us. So I want to thank everybody. Brooks and I will be checking out any of your comments that we didn't get to and trying to answer any of your questions that we didn't get around to. We'll follow that up on Facebook. For those of you who have never watched The Other Side or listened to the podcast The Other Side, I'll be on that tonight at about 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So you can come on and see a couple of really cool people talking about, I don't know what we're going to talk about, probably weirdness and music and ghosts and stuff. So thanks for tuning in to the Detective Diaries. Next week, I'm hoping to have Aaron Seegers on, and it's going to be awesome. Thanks for watching. See you later.